I am Nina Anderson, 29 years old, an investment banker from Seattle, Washington. All my life, I believed that hard work and loyalty to family would protect me, but I was wrong. When I was just 22, I discovered that my own parents had taken every dollar of my savings, the money I worked years to build, without asking, without even a hint of remorse. That betrayal became the turning point of my life, and years later, they faced consequences they never thought would come. Before I share my story, let me know where you are watching from and subscribe if you value standing up for yourself. From the outside, my family looked ordinary, even respectable. My father, Richard Anderson, worked as a mid-level manager at a shipping company. My mother, Denise, stayed at home, but she was the kind of woman who made sure everyone knew she was busy running the household. We lived in a modest 2-story house on the north side of Seattle, with a small yard where my brother Tyler and I spent most of our childhood playing soccer and baseball. I wasn't born with money. Every penny I saved came from sheer effort. At 16, while my classmates spent weekends at the mall, I worked at a coffee shop near Pike Place Market, serving endless cups of espresso to tourists. By 18, I had 2 jobs, the cafe during the day and tutoring middle schoolers in math during evenings. I was saving for college and later, for the dream of one day living in the city, working in finance, and proving to myself that I could be independent. I remember the little blue notebook where I tracked every dollar. My parents knew how careful I was. They even praised me sometimes. "Nina, you're so responsible," my mom would say, though she'd often follow it with, "Tyler should be more like you." I used to swell with pride, believing that my hard work made them proud, but their praise wasn't admiration, it was preparation. At 19, I landed an internship with a boutique investment firm downtown. It didn't pay much, but it gave me credibility. My boss, Mr. Jennings, noticed how meticulous I was with numbers and encouraged me to stick with finance. "You've got the discipline most 20-year-olds don't," he once told me. That encouragement lit a fire in me. I wanted to rise higher, faster. I wanted to earn my success. By the time I graduated college at 22, I had saved almost $48,000. It wasn't just money. It was my blood, sweat, and tears. I deposited it in a joint savings account that I shared with my parents, a decision I justified at the time as safe because they had better access to paperwork and I trusted them completely. They told me it would be easier for emergencies, for quick transfers if anything happened. And because they were my parents, I didn't question it. I should have. The summer after graduation, I planned to move into my first apartment in downtown Seattle, closer to my new job. It wasn't fancy, just a 1-bedroom unit with a view of the city skyline if I leaned far enough out of the balcony. I was excited. I could afford it, and for once, I felt the years of sacrifice were paying off. But when I logged into the bank account to transfer the deposit, I froze. The balance read $126, not $48,000, not even close. Just $126. I thought it was a mistake. I refreshed the page 3 times. Then I stared at the screen, my throat tightening, my vision blurring. I scrolled through the transaction history, and that's when the truth crushed me. Over the course of 6 months, my parents had been withdrawing small amounts, $2,000 here, $1,500 there, until the account was empty. I remember running to the kitchen where my mom was folding laundry. "Mom," I said, my voice breaking, "where's my money?" "The savings account, it's gone." She didn't even flinch. She calmly placed a folded towel on the counter and looked at me with that condescending stare she had perfected over the years. "Oh, we needed it. You needed it?" I shouted, my heart pounding. "That was my money. My entire savings." My father walked in, holding his coffee mug. "Lower your voice," he said, annoyed. "We had bills. The mortgage, your brother's tuition, the car repairs. It's family money, Nina. We'll pay you back when we can." Family money. That phrase stabbed me. It wasn't family money. It was mine. Mine from years of working when everyone else enjoyed their youth. "You didn't even ask me," I whispered, my hands trembling. "We didn't think we had to," my mom said sharply. "We're your parents. Everything we do is for this family. You'll thank us someday." Thank them? For stealing from me? I stormed upstairs, tears spilling uncontrollably. I locked my door and collapsed on the floor. That night, I stared at the ceiling for hours, replaying every moment when I had trusted them, every time I had believed they were proud of me. It all felt like a lie. The next day at work, I couldn't concentrate. Numbers blurred, spreadsheets mocked me, and every email felt heavy. Mr. Jennings pulled me aside. "Are you all right, Nina?" he asked. I wanted to tell him everything, but how could I? How could I admit that my own parents had betrayed me? I shook my head and muttered, "Just personal stuff." But deep inside, something shifted that day. Trust once broken doesn't mend easily. I knew my relationship with my parents would never be the same. That week, I started looking for ways to protect myself. I opened a new bank account under my name only. I worked overtime, not just for the paycheck, but to rebuild what was stolen. Every late night at the office, every Saturday spent reviewing portfolios instead of resting, was fueled by anger and determination. Still, I couldn't erase the pain. Family is supposed to be a safety net. For me, it had become a trap. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it was just the beginning. My parents didn't feel guilty. If anything, they began to act entitled to more, like my career was their insurance policy. And that entitlement, that arrogance, it set the stage for everything that came later. For the downfall they never saw coming. I told myself silently, one day, they'll regret this. One day they'll see what it means to betray me. And I kept working, waiting for the moment when life would hand me the chance to prove it. After discovering my parents had emptied my savings, I tried to keep my distance from them. But distance in a family home only goes so far. I still lived under their roof, and every time I crossed paths with my mom in the hallway or heard my father's footsteps in the kitchen, I felt my chest tighten. Their casualness about what they had done cut deeper than the theft itself. I didn't expect them to fall at my feet with apologies, but I had hoped for at least a sliver of remorse. Instead, my mom acted like she had done me a favor. "You'll rebuild," she said one evening, as if she was coaching me through a minor setback at work, instead of justifying stealing my future. My father was even more infuriating. He carried on with his routines like nothing had happened. Coffee before work, football on weekends, and the occasional muttered, "Don't make everything about money, Nina." But for me, everything was about money now. Money had been my shield, my ticket out, my way of proving that I was capable of standing on my own 2 feet. Without it, I felt exposed, vulnerable, and betrayed. I doubled down at work. I buried myself in client reports, investment strategies, and networking events. While other 22-year-olds went out drinking or planning weekend getaways, I stayed late at the office, hunched over glowing spreadsheets. My boss noticed. "You've got fire in you, Nina," Mr. Jennings told me during a quarterly review. "Don't let it burn you out." I nodded, offering a tired smile. He didn't know that fire came from a wound I was desperate to hide. Within 6 months, I managed to save nearly $10,000 again. It wasn't the $48,000 I had lost, but it was mine, and this time, it was untouchable. I had opened an individual account in my name only, secured with multiple layers of protection. No one could touch it, not even my parents. My brother Tyler, however, was another story. Tyler was 2 years younger than me, and unlike me, he had always been carefree, drifting through life with minimal effort. He switched majors 3 times in college, partied excessively, and constantly asked my parents for money. What stung the most was realizing that part of the money they had stolen from me had gone toward keeping Tyler afloat. One night, I overheard an argument between him and my dad in the living room. "Dad, I can't keep up with these tuition payments," Tyler complained. "You promised you'd help me. I already told you your sister's job will cover some of this. She'll step in when we need her to." I froze in the hallway. Step in? Like I was some kind of safety net for all of them? I confronted them later that night. "I'm not your backup plan," I snapped, my hands trembling. "I'm not paying Tyler's tuition or covering your debts. I already lost my savings because of you, and it won't happen again." My father's face darkened. "Watch your tone. This family has sacrifices, Nina. We all share the load." "Funny," I shot back, "because the only one carrying the load is me." The silence that followed was suffocating. My mom avoided my eyes. Tyler muttered something about me being dramatic, and my dad stormed off. That was the night I made my decision. I would move out, no matter how much it hurt, no matter how alone it made me feel. Finding an apartment in Seattle wasn't easy, especially on an entry-level salary, but I was determined. I combed through rental listings after work, calculated budgets down to the last penny, and eventually found a small studio in Capitol Hill. It wasn't glamorous, but it was freedom. When I told my parents, their reaction stunned me. "You're overreacting," my mom said dismissively. "Families borrow from each other all the time." My dad slammed his newspaper shut. "If you walk out of this house like this, don't expect us to be here when you come crawling back." I didn't flinch. If you cared about being there for me, you wouldn't have stolen from me in the first place. I packed my things in silence that weekend. Tyler barely acknowledged me. My parents didn't help. It was as if they had already erased me from the family photo album. The first night in my studio was both terrifying and exhilarating. I slept on a secondhand mattress with boxes piled around me, the hum of the city replacing the quiet of my childhood home. I should have felt lonely, but instead, I felt something new. Control. I started keeping a journal. Every night after work, I wrote down my goals: financial, personal, and professional. I promised myself I would never again give anyone the power to strip me of what I worked for. At the top of the first page, I scrawled, "One day, they'll regret it." Months turned into years. My career took off. By 25, I was promoted to associate, handling high-net-worth clients and managing portfolios that once would have terrified me. I bought furniture for my apartment, piece by piece, until it finally felt like a home. But even as I built this new life, the cracks in my relationship with my parents only widened. Phone calls turned into arguments. Holidays were tense. I visited less and less. The final straw came on my 26th birthday. My parents invited me over for dinner, and I reluctantly agreed. I walked into the same house where I had grown up, only to find Tyler sitting smugly at the table with my parents beaming at him. "Tyler just got a new car," my mom announced proudly. "We helped with the down payment." I stared at the gleaming keys in Tyler's hand, rage boiling in my chest. "With what money?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. My father shrugged. "Does it matter?" He needed help. That's what family does. I stood there, staring at them, realizing that nothing had changed. They had taken from me once, and they would keep taking as long as I let them. That night, as I drove back to my apartment, I knew the distance between us was no longer temporary. It was permanent. The foundation of our family had cracked beyond repair, and one day, those cracks would bring everything down, and I was no longer afraid to let it happen. Moving into my studio had felt like freedom, but freedom carried a price tag. Rent consumed nearly half my paycheck. Groceries ate another chunk, and utilities demanded the rest. I was careful, obsessively careful. I tracked every expense, cooked simple meals, and said no to social outings I couldn't afford. It was exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time in my life, every decision, every mistake, every success was mine alone. Still, the silence weighed on me. Some nights, I would sit by the window with the lights off, watching the glow of Seattle's skyline, wondering how different things might have been if my parents hadn't betrayed me. Would I still be under their roof, oblivious to their entitlement? Would I still be naive enough to believe they had my best interests at heart? I missed the illusion of family more than the family itself. Work became my refuge. I poured myself into every project, arriving early and leaving late. My reputation grew. Clients began requesting me by name, appreciating my thoroughness and composure. I could see a future where I would climb the ranks, maybe even become a partner one day. But my parents' betrayal lingered like a shadow. Whenever colleagues joked about borrowing money from family, or mentioned how their parents helped them buy their first homes, a bitterness rose in my throat. I kept my story hidden, ashamed of how naive I had been. At 24, I got my first real taste of recognition. The firm awarded me Rising Analyst of the Year, a title that came with a small bonus. Most people would have celebrated with champagne or a weekend getaway. I deposited the check directly into my savings account and updated my journal. The new total wasn't anywhere close to what my parents had stolen, but it was growing. I stared at the number on the page and whispered to myself, "They'll regret it. Someday, they'll see how much stronger I became without them. It wasn't just money that I was building. I began to create connections outside of work. Slowly, cautiously. One of them was Kylie, a fellow banker who had joined the firm a year after me. Unlike me, Kylie came from a family who supported her, but she never flaunted it. She was kind, thoughtful, and sharp as a blade when it came to numbers. One evening, after finishing a late client pitch, we sat together in the empty office, takeaway boxes scattered across the table. "You're different." "You know," she said, sipping her soda. "Different how?" I asked. "You don't just want to succeed, you need to. Like there's something pushing you harder than everyone else." I hesitated, then smiled weakly. "Let's just say I don't have a safety net. Failure isn't an option." Kylie studied me for a moment before nodding. "That makes sense. But you know, sometimes the strongest people are the ones who never had a net in the first place." Her words stuck with me. The cracks with my family widened even further when Tyler dropped out of college. I found out not from him, but through a passing comment from my mother during one of her rare phone calls. "He just wasn't happy there," she said casually, as though she were discussing a new recipe. "We told him he could take some time to figure things out." I clenched my jaw. "And how are you paying for him while he figures it out?" "Don't be so judgmental, Nina," she snapped. "Not everyone has to be like you." Her tone made it clear. I was the outsider now, the black sheep who chose ambition over loyalty. They didn't see that I had chosen survival. After I hung up, I wrote a single line in my journal. "They've made Tyler dependent because they need someone to control. I'll never let them do that to me again." By 25, I had saved enough for a down payment on a small condo. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. Signing the papers felt like reclaiming a piece of what I had lost. I furnished it slowly, each item chosen with care. A couch that fit just right, a desk where I could work late nights, a bookshelf filled with the financial texts that had guided me. The condo became more than a home. It became proof. Proof that I could rise without their help, that I could carve my own path. But even as I celebrated privately, resentment grew. Every step forward reminded me of the years I had lost, the sacrifices I had made because of their theft. The breaking point came during a family wedding when I was 26. Reluctantly, I agreed to attend, thinking maybe enough time had passed to ease the tension. I dressed carefully, arriving with Kylie as my +1 for moral support. The moment I walked into the reception hall, I felt eyes on me. My mother approached, her smile tight. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I forced a polite smile. "Good to see you too, Mom." Throughout the evening, she paraded Tyler around, boasting about how he was finding himself and considering business school. Every word felt like a jab. Meanwhile, my father avoided me altogether, as though I were an unwelcome guest rather than his daughter. The final straw came when my mother, wineglass in hand, leaned in close and said, "You know, Nina, money isn't everything. One day, you'll realize family matters more than success." I looked her straight in the eye. "You're right, Mom. Family should matter. But you made it clear a long time ago that money mattered more to you than I ever did." Her smile faltered. For once, she had no quick retort. That night, driving back with Kylie, I let the mask slip. Tears burned in my eyes as I gripped the steering wheel. "They'll never change," I whispered. Kylie placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Then maybe it's not about them changing. Maybe it's about you building a life so strong they can't touch it." Her words became my mantra. From that point on, my mission wasn't just to rebuild. It was to rise so high that when they looked at me, they'd be forced to confront what they had thrown away. The cost of independence was heavy. Loneliness, long hours, constant pressure. But it was shaping me into someone unrecognizable from the naive girl who once trusted her parents with everything. And deep down, I knew the reckoning was coming. When I moved into my condo, it felt like the final thread tying me to my parents had been cut. The studio had been a temporary escape, but this place was permanent. My space, my name on the deed, my lock on the door. Every time I slid the key into the handle, I felt a rush of pride. It wasn't just a home. It was proof that they hadn't destroyed me. Still, family has a way of sneaking back in, even when you think you've shut the door for good. Tyler showed up one evening unannounced. I had just gotten home from work, balancing takeout and files when I found him slouched against my doorway, looking sheepish. "Hey, sis," he said. I hesitated before unlocking the door. "Tyler, what are you doing here?" He shrugged. "Needed a place to crash. Things at home are complicated." That word, complicated, sent a chill through me. I knew what it meant. It meant my parents were running out of money again. Inside, he dropped his backpack on the couch and glanced around. "Nice place. You've done well for yourself." I set the takeout on the counter, crossing my arms. "Cut to the chase. Why are you really here?" Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Mom and Dad, they're struggling. Dad's hours got cut, and Mom's been talking about selling the house. They thought maybe you could help." I let out a sharp laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Help? Like the way they helped themselves to my savings?" Tyler winced. "It's not like that." "Yes, it is exactly like that." For years, I had dreamed of the moment my parents might regret what they had done, and now, hearing that they were desperate, a part of me felt vindicated. But another part, the daughter who still longed for approval, felt the familiar pull of guilt. "Tyler," I said finally, "I worked for this. Every late night, every missed weekend, every breakdown I pushed through, it was all me. They don't get to ask for more after what they did." He sighed. "I figured you'd say that." He grabbed his bag and stood. "You've changed, Nina." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Tyler, I grew up. Maybe you should try it." He left without another word. At work, my world was the opposite of chaos. I thrived. Promotions came, first to senior associate, then to junior vice president. My clients trusted me with millions, and I guarded every dollar as if it were my own. My colleagues began to joke that I had a sixth sense for risk. They didn't know the truth, that my instincts were born out of betrayal, that I had learned early how quickly trust could vanish. Kylie remained my anchor. We often worked side by side until midnight, sharing takeout and stories about our lives. She knew bits and pieces about my family, but not the full story. It was too raw, too humiliating. One night, as we celebrated another successful client acquisition, she raised her glass. "To you, Nina. You're unstoppable." For a moment, I believed her. But success has a way of catching attention, even from people you hope never to see again. It started with phone calls from my mother. At first, they were rare. Holiday greetings, birthday wishes, but then they became frequent, always circling back to money. "We could use just a little help with the mortgage," she'd say, her tone sugary sweet. "You're doing so well, and it's not like we're asking for much." Every time I clenched my jaw and refused. "No, Mom, I won't go down that road again." Her sweetness would vanish instantly. "Ungrateful girl. After all we've done for you." I hung up more times than I could count, shaking with rage. The final break came at Thanksgiving. Against my better judgment, I agreed to attend a family dinner at my parents' house. Kylie warned me, but part of me wanted to test myself, to prove I could face them without breaking. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was peeling, the lawn overgrown. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. My father barely greeted me, and my mother forced a brittle smile. Tyler was there too, avoiding eye contact. Dinner started quietly enough, but it didn't take long for the mask to slip. "So," my mother said, carving the turkey with exaggerated effort, "your brother tells us you bought a condo. Must be nice." I set down my fork carefully. "Yes, it is. I worked hard for it," my father snorted. "Don't act like you're better than us, Nina. We raised you. Everything you have is because of us." My blood boiled. "No," I said firmly. "Everything I have is despite you." The table went silent. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, and my mother's face twisted with rage. "How dare you speak to us that way?" she hissed. "We sacrifice for you, and this is the thanks we get?" I stood, my chair scraping the floor. "You didn't sacrifice for me. You stole from me. And now you're paying the price." I walked out that night, leaving my plate untouched. It was the last time I stepped foot in that house. From then on, I focused solely on myself. I invested, saved, and expanded my portfolio. By 28, I was managing assets that dwarfed the money my parents had stolen. I traveled, attended conferences, and even bought a second property as a rental investment. But even with all that success, the scar remained. Betrayal doesn't just vanish, it shapes you. And while my parents struggled, scraping by on dwindling resources, I soared higher. Friends sometimes asked why I pushed myself so hard. Because I refused to be powerless, I would say. And in quiet moments, I would think of my parents sitting in that crumbling house, realizing that the daughter they had drained dry had become untouchable. The distance between us wasn't just emotional, it was financial, social, and moral. We lived in different worlds now, and I had no intention of ever crossing back into theirs. By the time I turned 29, my life looked nothing like the girl who once wept over losing her savings. I was now a vice president at my firm, my name printed on business cards that carried weight. I wore tailored suits, commanded rooms full of clients, and lived in a modern condo with sweeping views of the city skyline. Everything I had built was a reflection of grit and defiance. But while my life thrived, my parents' world was crumbling. I first heard whispers of their troubles from an old neighbor. Mrs. Reynolds, who had lived down the street from my childhood home, bumped into me at a coffee shop. "Your folks still in the old house?" she asked. I shook my head. "I don't know, why?" She leaned closer. "Word is they're months behind on the mortgage. Tyler moved back in too. Place doesn't look the same without your touch." Her words caught me off guard. I hadn't set foot near that house in years, but hearing about its decay stung in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't nostalgia, it was vindication. They had stolen from me, and now they were drowning. The confirmation came weeks later when Tyler showed up at my office. "Nina," he said nervously, wringing his hands. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't serious." I sighed, motioning for him to sit. "What is it this time?" He looked thinner, worn down. "Mom and Dad are in trouble. They're about to lose the house. Dad's debts finally caught up, and Mom, well, she's been using credit cards for everything." I folded my arms. "And let me guess, you're here to ask me to fix it?" Tyler's eyes pleaded. "They need $30,000 to save the house. You have that kind of money, Nina. Please." My stomach twisted. 30,000. The number echoed in my head like a cruel reminder of the 48,000 they had stolen from me years ago. I leaned forward, my voice icy. "Do you have any idea how hard I worked to rebuild what they took from me? Do you know the nights I went hungry? The times I cried myself to sleep because I had nothing left? And now you're asking me to hand over more?" Tyler flinched. "I know they were wrong, but they're still our parents." "They stopped being parents the day they chose money over me," I snapped. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared out at the glittering skyline, the city alive while my childhood home was on the verge of collapse. The old me might have caved, thrown them a lifeline despite everything, but the woman I had become knew better. If I bailed them out, it would never end. They would always see me as their safety net, their walking wallet, and I refused to be their crutch. Instead, I wrote in my journal, "This is the turning point. Not for them, for me. I will not save them. I will watch them face the consequences they earned." A month later, the house went up for auction. Kylie found the listing online and showed it to me with wide eyes. "Nina, this is your childhood home." I nodded, my chest tight but resolute. "Not anymore. That place hasn't been mine in a long time," she hesitated. "You could buy it, you know. Make it yours again." The thought lingered, tempting, owning the house that had once been a prison of betrayal. It would be the ultimate symbol of how far I'd come. On the day of the auction, I showed up. My parents didn't know I was there. I sat quietly in the back as the bidding began. When the final gavel fell, the house was mine. I didn't buy it to live in. I bought it to reclaim my power. Standing in those rooms again was surreal. The faded wallpaper, the creaky floorboards, the echoes of arguments that had defined my childhood. It all came rushing back. But this time I wasn't the powerless daughter. I was the owner. I renovated the house, not with love, but with precision. Fresh paint, new floors, modern fixtures. Each change erased the ghosts of my parents' control and replaced them with my vision. Neighbors whispered when they saw me overseeing the work. Some congratulated me, others looked shocked, but I didn't care. This was my closure. The day my parents realized what I had done was one I'll never forget. Tyler called, his voice tight with disbelief. "You bought the house? Why?" "Because I could," I said simply. Mom called next, her voice trembling with rage. "How could you humiliate us like this? That was our home." "No, Mom," I said calmly. "It was my savings that kept you afloat all those years. You stole from me, and now I own the place you lost. Call it balance," her voice cracked. "We're your parents." "And I was your daughter," I replied. "But you chose money over me. Now you're just people who made the worst investment of their lives." I hung up before she could respond. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. People who once pitied my parents now looked at me with respect. Some even said I was ruthless, but I wore the label like armor. I hadn't set out to destroy them. I had set out to protect myself. Their downfall was simply the result of their own actions. The turning point wasn't that I bought the house or that they lost everything. The real turning point was inside me. I no longer craved their approval. I no longer needed their acknowledgement. For the first time, I felt free. Owning the house was one thing. Living with the fallout was another. Within a week of the auction, the news had reached every corner of the neighborhood. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old friends, acquaintances, even former neighbors who remembered me as the girl who was always studying. Some congratulated me. Others asked in hushed tones if it was true I had taken the house from my parents. I ignored most of them. Their opinions didn't matter. What mattered was that I finally had closure. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The truth was, my parents weren't going to let this go quietly. It started with letters. Handwritten notes arrived at my office, slipped under my condo door, even mailed to my firm's headquarters. They were rambling, desperate. "Nina, you don't understand what you've done. We're homeless now. Tyler is couch surfing. You've ruined us. Please have mercy." Other times they shifted to anger. "How dare you humiliate us like this? After everything we gave you, this is how you repay us?" Each letter was signed with both of their names, but I could tell the handwriting was my mother's. My father, as always, stayed in the background. At first, I shredded the notes without reading past the first line. But eventually one landed heavier than the rest. "Nina, I am sick. We have nowhere to go. Do you really want your parents to suffer like this? You have the power to help, and you choose not to." For a moment, the old guilt rose up like a tide. But then I reminded myself I hadn't made them sick. I hadn't emptied their accounts. I hadn't built their debts. They had done all of that themselves. One Saturday morning, I drove by the house to check on the renovations. Fresh siding gleamed in the sun, and new windows sparkled where the old drafty ones used to be. Workers were hauling in flooring for the upstairs bedrooms. That's when I saw them. My mother and father, standing on the sidewalk across the street, watching. She looked smaller than I remembered, her hair thinner, her shoulders slumped. My father stood rigid beside her, his face tight, unreadable. We locked eyes across the road. She lifted a trembling hand, as if to wave, but I turned away and walked inside. For the first time, I felt no urge to bridge the gap between us. I let the door close behind me and focused on the sound of hammers and saws. This was my house now, not theirs. At work, people whispered. Kylie, who had been by my side through so much, pulled me aside one evening. "Nina, are you sure you're okay? People are saying your parents are basically out on the streets." I nodded, setting down my coffee. "They made their choices. I'm not responsible for cleaning them up." She searched my face. "You don't feel even a little guilty?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "Not anymore. Guilt kept me trapped for years. This is justice." She squeezed my shoulder. "Then hold on to that. Don't let anyone rewrite what happened." Her words grounded me. Still, a part of me knew the story wasn't over. The reckoning came when Tyler reached out again. He showed up at my condo one evening, looking rougher than before. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes sunken. He stood in the doorway, hesitant. "Can we talk?" he asked. I crossed my arms. Depends. Are you here for them or for yourself? For me, he said quickly. I need to understand. I let him in. We sat at the kitchen island, the silence thick. Finally, he spoke. Mom and Dad, they're falling apart. They keep saying you betrayed them, that you're cruel. But I keep thinking, maybe they betrayed you first. Maybe they set all of this in motion years ago. Hearing Tyler say those words felt like the air shifting in the room. For so long, I had been the lone voice calling it betrayal. Now, my brother was starting to see it too. I didn't want this for them, I said softly, but I won't save them either. If they lose everything, it's because of their choices. He nodded slowly. I get it now. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. Tears pricked my eyes, but I held them back. It's not your fault, Tyler. You were just caught in their web. Weeks later, the house was finished. I rented it out to a young couple, their laughter filling the halls where I had once cried. Watching them move in was like exhaling after holding my breath for years. The house wasn't a monument to pain anymore. It was a fresh start, not just for them, but for me too. Meanwhile, my parents moved into a rundown apartment across town. I knew because Tyler told me. They're not doing well, he said. But maybe that's what they need to finally learn. I didn't respond. Part of me wanted to know every detail of their suffering. Another part wanted to cut the cord completely. The reckoning wasn't dramatic. There was no courtroom, no screaming showdown. It was quiet, steady, undeniable. They had gambled with my future and lost. And now they were living the consequences. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like their victim. I felt like the one who had broken the cycle, and deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of their downfall and the beginning of my true freedom. I always thought revenge would come with fire. Loud, dramatic, impossible to ignore. But the truth? Sometimes revenge comes quietly, with whispers that spread until everyone knows. By the time winter rolled around, my parents' decline wasn't just family gossip. It had become neighborhood news. Their once proud image, the couple who bragged about vacations and boasted about their children's potential, was unraveling in front of everyone. I didn't make it happen. They did. But I won't lie. Watching it unfold was its own kind of justice. The first hint came during a charity gala hosted by my firm. It was a glittering evening, with champagne glasses clinking and the soft hum of string instruments in the background. I was networking with a client when a woman I barely recognized approached me. "You're Nina Anderson, right? From Greenleaf Street?" she asked, tilting her head. I blinked. "Yes, why?" Her lips curved into a sympathetic smile. "I used to live near your parents. I heard they lost their house. Must be hard for you, watching them go through that." For a second, the old guilt tugged at me, but then I straightened my shoulders. "Hard? No, necessary." Her smile faltered, but she nodded slowly. "Fair enough." As she walked away, I realized the shift that had taken place. People weren't just whispering about my parents anymore. They were coming to me with their questions. They wanted to know my side, and for once, I wasn't afraid to tell it. It wasn't long before the whispers reached my professional world. A colleague pulled me aside after a meeting. "I heard your parents defaulted on their mortgage," he said carefully. "Is that true?" I met his gaze evenly. "Yes. And if you must know, they stole nearly $50,000 from me when I was 22. I built myself back from nothing while they spent freely. Now, the tables have turned." His eyes widened, but there was no judgment, just respect. "That explains a lot," he said softly. "Why you fight so hard, why you don't waste time." In that moment, I realized something powerful. My story wasn't one of shame anymore. It was one of survival. The public exposure escalated when a local newspaper ran a piece about the housing auction. Former home of George and Carol Anderson sold to daughter, rising investment banker. I hadn't expected the article, but when Kylie forwarded it to me with wide eyes, I couldn't help but laugh. "They're going to hate this," she said, half in awe. "They already do," I replied. The article was brief, factual, but the headline alone was enough to spark conversation across town. People who once sided with my parents began reaching out with new perspectives. Some apologized for believing their version of events. Others offered congratulations, and a few surprisingly confided their own stories of betrayal. "Nina, my brother drained my savings once," one former classmate messaged me. "I never told anyone because I was so ashamed. Seeing you stand tall makes me think maybe I don't have to hide it anymore." That message hit me harder than I expected. My pain, once so isolating, had become a lifeline for others. Of course, my parents didn't take it well. One afternoon, I got a furious voicemail from my mother. "How could you let people believe we're thieves? Do you know how humiliating this is? The whole neighborhood is laughing at us, Nina. You're ruining our reputation." I replayed it twice, each time shaking my head in disbelief. Ruining their reputation? They had done that themselves years ago. All I had done was refuse to cover it up anymore. I deleted the voicemail without responding. Tyler, however, wasn't as quiet. He met me for coffee one weekend, his expression tense. "They're spiraling, Nina. Everyone knows now. Dad can't even show his face at work without people whispering. Mom cries every night." I stirred my latte calmly. "And whose fault is that?" He hesitated. "Theirs, I know. But still, this is brutal." I leaned back in my chair. "Tyler, I didn't expose them. Their actions exposed themselves. I'm done carrying their shame like it's mine." For once, he didn't argue. He just nodded, though his eyes were clouded with conflict. As the weeks passed, the exposure only grew. I attended a networking event downtown, and a senior partner pulled me aside. "I read about you in the paper," he said. "Most people would have crumbled under that kind of betrayal. But you," he smiled, "you turned it into fuel. That's the kind of resilience this firm needs." His words stayed with me. For so long, I had feared being seen as the broken daughter of careless parents. But now, being open about my scars was strengthening my career, my relationships, even my sense of self. It was ironic, really. The very thing my parents thought would shame me forever had become the reason people respected me. The tipping point came at a holiday party thrown by an old neighbor. I hadn't planned to go, but Kylie convinced me. "It's time you show your face without fear. You don't hide anymore." So I went. The moment I walked in, conversations paused. People glanced at me, then back at each other, their whispers rippling like waves. I braced myself, then lifted my chin and smiled. Within minutes, people approached me, some cautiously, others warmly. "You really bought the house?" one asked. "Yes," I said simply. "And your parents? They made their choices. Now they're living with them." I didn't offer more, and I didn't need to. My composure spoke louder than any explanation. When I got home that night, I stood on my balcony, looking out at the city lights. For the first time, I felt truly unburdened. Their downfall wasn't my secret anymore. It was public knowledge, and instead of destroying me, it had freed me. Justice didn't come in courtrooms or dramatic confrontations. It came in whispers turned into truths, in reputations crumbling while mine rose higher. This was the reckoning I had waited for, and I wasn't done yet. The exposure was like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples just kept spreading. My parents' disgrace no longer belonged to the neighborhood alone. It had seeped into their work, their friendships, and even the extended family they once bragged to at reunions. For years, they had crafted an image of being respectable, hard-working parents who sacrificed everything for their children. Now everyone knew the truth. They had stolen from their daughter, lost their home, and been left scrambling while I rebuilt my life without them. The fallout was harsher than even I had imagined. The first blow came from my father. He had worked at a mid-level position for a logistics company for nearly 2 decades. Despite his shortcomings at home, he had managed to maintain the facade of a steady, dependable employee. But after the article about the house circulated, his boss started asking questions. Tyler told me later. Dad came home furious. Apparently, a client asked if the embezzlement rumors were true. He snapped, said it was a private family matter, but the damage was done. People don't trust him anymore. A month later, he was quietly let go. Officially, it was part of company downsizing. Unofficially, it was clear they didn't want someone with that kind of baggage representing their firm. My mother fared no better. Her reputation had always been her greatest currency. She thrived on hosting luncheons, attending charity functions, and being seen as the woman who had it all together. But after the whispers began, invitations stopped coming. Kylie sent me a screenshot one afternoon. It was from a local social group's online forum. Carol Anderson showed up to the Peterson fundraiser last week. Can you believe she had the nerve? After what she did to her own daughter? The replies were brutal, shameless. I'd die of embarrassment if I were her. Some people just don't know when to stay home. When I read those words, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel pity either. I felt nothing. For the first time, their humiliation no longer had any power over me. The real fallout, though, wasn't just social or professional. It was personal. Tyler told me that their marriage, already fragile, began to crack under the weight of their disgrace. They blame each other for everything, he said, sounding exhausted. Dad says Mom pushed him to take the money. Mom says Dad should have managed it better. They fight constantly. I imagine them in that shabby apartment, the walls echoing with blame, their voices sharp, bitter. Two people who had once been so united in taking from me now tearing each other apart. It should have satisfied me. Instead, it left me with a hollow ache. This was the fallout of betrayal. It didn't just consume the betrayers. It scorched everything around them. One night, Tyler called me out of the blue. His voice was strained. I don't know what to do anymore, Nina, he admitted. They're sinking fast. Dad drinks too much, Mom barely leaves the apartment. And me, I feel stuck in the middle. I sat in silence for a long moment, then asked, why do you feel like it's your responsibility to save them? Because they're our parents, he said automatically, then softer. Because if I don't, who will? I sighed. Tyler, I spent years believing it was my job to carry them, to protect them, to forgive them, but where did that get me? Broke. Alone. Broken. You have to decide if you want to keep playing that role or if you want to live your own life. He didn't answer right away, but I could hear him breathing heavily, like the weight of my words pressed against his chest. The fallout extended even further than I expected. One Sunday, I was grocery shopping when I ran into my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister. She looked at me with a mix of sadness and admiration. Nina, she said, resting a hand on my arm, I just want you to know I'm proud of you. Your parents may never admit it, but you did what they couldn't. You stood on your own. Her words caught me off guard. For years, extended family had tiptoed around the subject, never choosing sides. Hearing her speak plainly felt like validation I didn't know I needed. Thank you, I said quietly. She leaned closer, and don't feel guilty for their downfall. They made their bed. Now they have to lie in it. Her bluntness made me smile. Sometimes the truth was best said without decoration. Despite everything, a part of me still wrestled with conflicting emotions. Late at night, lying in bed with the city lights streaming through my window, I asked myself, was I too harsh? Could I have given them another chance? But then I remembered sitting in my empty apartment at 22, my savings gone, my dreams shattered. I remembered the cold, dismissive tone in my mother's voice when I asked why they did it. You'll thank us one day. We needed it more than you did. No, I hadn't been too harsh. I had simply stopped letting them use me. The fallout wasn't just theirs. It was mine too, but in a different way. I no longer lived with the constant ache of trying to earn their approval. I no longer replayed old arguments in my head, wondering what I could have done differently. For the first time, I felt free. My parents were learning in the hardest way possible that actions have consequences. And I was learning that healing doesn't always come with forgiveness. Sometimes it comes with boundaries. The fallout was messy, painful, and raw. But it was also the proof that I had finally broken free from their grip. By the time spring rolled around, the dust from the scandal had settled into something more permanent. My parents weren't just in a slump. They were living in a reality of their own making. Their downfall was no longer fresh gossip. It was fact. They had lost their home, their reputations, their friendships, and their sense of control. And through it all, I had gained something I never expected: clarity. The penultimate lesson was not about revenge. It was about perspective. It started with a letter from my father. Unlike the rambling, guilt-drenched notes my mother had sent, his was short, precise, almost businesslike. Nina, I know you don't owe us anything, but I want you to know. I see now how badly we hurt you. I should have stopped it. I should have protected you instead of standing by. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I regret it every day. I read the letter 3 times, searching for hidden manipulation, some angle of deceit, but there was none. For the first time in my life, my father had spoken plainly. It didn't erase the past. It didn't rebuild trust, but it cracked the wall I had built around my heart, just enough to let me breathe differently. That same week, Tyler invited me to meet him at a small cafe downtown. He looked tired, but lighter somehow. "I've decided I can't live my life for them anymore," he said as soon as we sat down. Relief swept over me. "Tyler, that's the smartest decision you've ever made." He laughed softly. "I should have listened to you earlier. I kept thinking I could fix it, but I was drowning with them. I need to build my own future." For the first time in years, I saw my brother as someone separate from our parents' chaos. He wasn't just their son anymore. He was his own man, ready to step out of their shadow. In his choice, I saw another lesson. Freedom isn't just for me. It's something we all deserve, if we're willing to let go. The biggest test of my resolve came unexpectedly. One Saturday afternoon, I was walking through the farmer's market when I spotted my mother across the crowd. Her once polished appearance had faded. Her coat was worn, her hair unkempt. She was standing by a stall, arguing with a vendor over the price of strawberries. Our eyes met. For a moment, the years peeled away, and I was a little girl again, desperate for her approval. But then I blinked, and reality snapped back into focus. She crossed the street quickly, reaching me before I could turn away. "Nina," she said breathlessly. "Please, we need help." I stared at her, my heart steady. "You don't need my help. You need accountability." Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice turned sharp. "You'll regret this. When we're gone, you'll regret not being there." The words used to cut me deeply, but now they fell flat. I shook my head. "The only regret I have is how long I let you hurt me." I walked away, leaving her standing in the middle of the market, clutching her bag like a shield. That moment sealed it for me. Forgiveness was optional. Boundaries were not. The penultimate lesson was this: healing isn't about changing the people who hurt you. It's about changing the way you see yourself in their story. I used to think I was the victim, the powerless daughter robbed of her future. But I wasn't powerless, I was resourceful. I built a new life out of nothing. I turned betrayal into strength. My parents, they remained trapped, not just by their mistakes, but by their refusal to grow. That was the difference between us. As I walked home that evening, I thought about the house. The young couple who rented it had sent me photos of the nursery they had set up in one of the bedrooms. The same room where I had once cried myself to sleep over stolen savings now held a crib, painted walls, and the promise of new life. That image stayed with me. It reminded me that nothing stays broken forever, unless we choose to leave it that way. A week later, Kylie and I sat on my balcony sipping wine. The sun was setting, painting the Seattle sky in soft pinks and oranges. "You seem different," she observed. "I am," I admitted. For years I thought revenge would heal me, but it wasn't the revenge, it was the boundaries, the clarity, the freedom. Kylie smiled knowingly. "So, you're ready for the final chapter?" I laughed softly. "Yes, and this time I get to write it." The fallout had burned everything to ash. But from the ash I was building something new, something real. The penultimate lesson was not about what they lost. It was about what I gained. And I knew the final lesson was waiting, just around the corner. The end of a story rarely feels like an end when you're living it. Most of the time, it's just another day. Quiet, ordinary, until you look back and realize something has shifted forever. For me, that realization came on a crisp autumn morning as I walked through the neighborhood where I grew up. The leaves crunched beneath my boots. The air smelled of wood smoke, and the houses stood proud with their porches decorated for fall. I paused in front of my parents' old home, or rather what used to be theirs. The young couple who rented it had decorated the porch with pumpkins, their laughter drifting through the open window. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me. It was so different from the tension and criticism that had once filled those walls. This house had seen betrayal, but now it was sheltering new beginnings. I smiled, realizing I didn't feel bitterness anymore, just closure. Not long after, I received another letter from my father. This one wasn't businesslike. It was raw. Honest. Nina, your mother will never admit it, but she knows too. We were wrong. We stole from you and we paid the price. You deserved better, and you built better. I don't know if there's a way back from here, but I hope someday you'll remember us not just for our mistakes, but for the few moments we got it right. I folded the letter gently and placed it in a drawer. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement, and that was enough. Tyler visited me soon after. We shared dinner in my apartment overlooking the city, the skyline glowing under the night sky. They're different now, he said quietly. Not better, not healed, just smaller. I set my glass down. That's the consequence of living without accountability. They shrank into the choices they made. He studied me for a moment. And you grew. I nodded, a calm certainty filling me. Yes, I grew. We clinked our glasses together in silent agreement. Looking back, the path was brutal. At 22, I had been gutted by betrayal, left without savings, without trust, and without direction. But now, at 29, I stood taller, sharper, and freer than ever before. I didn't get here by waiting for an apology. I got here by taking control of my story, by learning that family doesn't excuse cruelty, that blood doesn't entitle someone to your trust, that forgiveness is optional, but boundaries are essential. The final voice I give you now is not about vengeance. It's about liberation. If you've ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most, you know the kind of wound it leaves. But wounds can become wisdom. Scars can become strength, and the life you rebuild can be better than the one you lost. I don't live for their approval anymore. I live for mine. And so I'll leave you with this. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. Because the deepest truth I've learned is this. Sometimes the family we imagine is not the family we're born into, but the one we create through our choices, our courage, and our resilience.